Hey nerds, Farmer Jesse here. Welcome to Growers Daily, your daily dose of ecological farming insight. It is Thursday, March 19th, 2026, and today we're going to do a Harvest Day celebration, talk about some of the most and least enjoyable crops to harvest, how to dry greens, types of packaging for each crop, and what crops you should harvest first on your Harvest Day. So let's do it. All right, happy Thursday, everyone. I hope you all are doing well and feeling well and all those good things. My voice continues to improve, just very little by very little. I think I will be doing a hybrid episode again tomorrow, with the hope being that I can get back to full episodes next week. But I have to say that we've got a lot of comments liking some of these compilation episodes, so that feels good. We're happy that the content is helpful, and at very least, we will be doing some original content by Monday, as long as my voice maintains its current trajectory upward or backward or whatever word is helpful to me right now. Actually, you know what? Scratch that. There may be a little new original content coming for you on Sunday. Not making any promises, but Mike and I may have whipped something special up for you YouTube family. We shall see. Speaking of Mike, don't forget to send your 20-second farm video clips to farmermike@no-tillgrowers.com. Loved seeing those this week. While I can only do so much talking about my own farm and gardens, it's a joy to see what you all are up to. Anyway, you'll hear more from present day me tomorrow. But for today, let's dive in to this harvest extravaganza.
Dorcasaur writes, firstly, loving the show so far. Thank you, Dorcasaur. A couple questions, not so much topics as curiosity. As a market farmer, what, if any, crops do you enjoy harvesting the most? What do you enjoy the least? Okay, awesome. I love these sorts of questions. And I actually spent a kind of embarrassing amount of time trying to come up with a good answer for this because it changes a little bit with the seasons. First, though, at this point in my career, I've grown just about every basic vegetable crop, save for maybe like artichokes and salsify. Certainly, there are herbs and traditional root crops I haven't grown, but based on what you would find at the average grocery store, I think I've grown almost all of it. On the negative side, any large root crops harvested when it's cold have to rank among my least favorite crops to harvest. Parsnips, for instance, I love them dearly, but you sow parsnips in February or early March, and then they grow all season, and you really don't want to harvest them until December after some good hard freezes when they are at their sweetest. Now, I've never had the good fortune of having loose enough soil to just pop them out like I often can with something like carrots, though I'm not sure anyone does for a crop that gets as deep as parsnips, maybe in like sandier soils. But being able to just pop them out would change my whole perception of growing and harvesting them. Dealing with the cold, clay-covered roots is just brutal and always feels like I waited a year to simply dig up a bunch of weed seeds and then have frozen hands while I did so. Doesn't always seem like the best use of time. Moreover, those parsnips will also give certain people some nice-looking welts on their arms, these like fun little rashes. So that's fun. I get them a little bit, but I've seen people that where it just looks like they just got beat up. That said, parsnips are outrageously tasty. So worth it? Maybe, at least for a small home garden. Another crop I find brutal to harvest is okra, but not at the beginning of its life. I know that's like, it has a reputation for being hard to harvest. I love harvesting okra most of the season. The okra we grow and have grown for many years, saving seed on it all the while, is a burgundy type okra. And although, sure, it's a little stingy always, like I said, in the beginning, when it's happy, it's not that much of a big deal. However, we've observed how this crop becomes particularly and literally more irritating towards the end of the season, right before the first frosts. Without any scientific evidence, I have always just assumed this was just because the plant is trying to better protect its progeny. Like it produces more of the stinging spines to stay back off my babies. Either way, there comes a point in the season when I more or less just give up on harvesting okra because the irritation gets so bad and it clearly wants to be left alone. So message received. Those would probably be my least favorite, though you could also throw in there just about any crop on a freezing cold day or one of those harvest days where it's rainy and 40 degrees outside. That has to be the worst weather combo. Rain, wind, and just above freezing. No thanks. I'm good. I remember having to harvest a bunch of kale in late November when I was a young apprentice, where I could barely feel my hands or toes because the temperature was right at freezing and the kale was wet from dew. So no matter what you wore, the cold ultimately got through it. Not my favorite thing. As for things I do enjoy harvesting, I enjoy anything I can do standing up. I also like things like beets and turnips, as well as most alliums like onions and garlic. There's a satisfaction to popping those things out of the ground. It's the noise, it's the feeling, it's the smell, as long as the onions are not rotting. I love it. I always enjoy the sweet potato harvest as well, just as much for getting to see what the harvest looks like as for the fact that when it's usually done, the time of year, is when the weather has shifted from the summer to the fall and the temperatures are finally somewhat tolerable. I'm kind of somewhat indifferent, I guess, to harvesting things like tomatoes and squash and cucumbers. Anything I can do standing up is at very least neutral to me. I like things I can harvest with a quick cut greens harvester like arugula or baby lettuce. That's pretty satisfying. I would always rather harvest head lettuce over mixed lettuce though, if I had a choice, just because it's so simple and efficient. I'm weirdly not a fan of harvesting baby radishes. I don't know if that's weird, but not a fan. I don't know why. Maybe it's just having to deal with such a delicate crop while I'm in a hurry on a busy summer harvest morning. But yeah, definitely not one of my favorites.
Welcome to my kitchen garden in Mobile, Alabama, Zone 9A. We've got the winter arugula, spinach, and lettuce going on, along with some garlic. But now the blueberries are blooming, figs have set fruit. Pride and joy this year ought to be our cantaloupe patch, which we hope to save with a top dressing of buckets this evening due to expected temperatures in the 30s.
Today's episode is brought to you by Grown By. Grow smarter with Grown By, the farmer-owned cooperative. Grown By is the platform for online sales of everything. Custom and traditional CSAs, halves of beef, flower bouquets, wholesale to restaurants, and now Grown By supports in-person sales too. With their new app, Grown By Register, you can supercharge your market and farm stand, finally bringing together your online and offline sales and customer data. Grown By is proud to make local food accessible by processing SNAP benefits online and in person right within the app. Grown By helps you to put your best food forward. Schedule a demo today at coop.grownby.com/no-till. That's coop.grownby.com/no-till. All right, back to the show.
All right, so we got a question from Patreon member Anna Hazen that I thought would be good to post now for anyone designing their wash pack station for the spring. Anna wrote, quote, "After listening to a food safety related episode from earlier this fall, I would really like to hear how you or others make sure produce dries after washing. Fans, drip dry, what would be food safe, but also doable on a small scale? Thanks." Awesome. Thanks to you, Anna. So yes, when it comes to food safety, moisture is your enemy, or well, it's at least one of your enemies. And so when it comes to washing and packing produce, you definitely want to do everything in your power to get the produce pretty dry. So I'll go through what we use to get our greens dry, and then talk about what I know others use and what even industrial folks use. So first, food safety starts with the quality of water. We use county water to wash our greens because it is already sanitary. If you were on a well, you would want to get some sort of sanitation additives like Sanidate tablets, which are honestly not a bad idea no matter what water you're using. You do not want to make anyone sick, but as soon as you introduce water, you run that risk. So good food safety starts with good, safe, cleaning water. Well, actually, it starts in the field, but that's for another time. What we do is that we wash the greens in 2 different tanks and then set them above an empty sink in perforated bins to drip dry for a minute while they wait for the salad spinner, which is a modified washing machine, in fact, modified by our interns from that year that I just mentioned. It's still going after 7 years, which is amazing. Now, you don't have to build your own if you like this one. And if you were like me, not mechanical, you can buy industrial spinners, which may be easier, albeit more expensive. The hand spinners are okay, just slow and will not do much volume, at least not efficiently. And they're quite a workout. So use those in the first year, perhaps, though they are not all that cheap. But I wouldn't think of a hand spinner as a long-term spinning solution. Anyway, we use that washing machine to spin dry lettuce greens, and then we dump them into another bin to dry a little bit more before packing them. Some folks go as far as fan drying them. I think there's nothing wrong with laying them out on a table and drying them with fans. It may add time and expense, but will increase food safety, which is always good. Forever, I have wanted to create a machine that is sort of like one of those cash grab booths, you know, that we used to see on game shows where you put the lettuce in and it just sort of blows around, and then you take it out and pack it. Like you could have it on a conveyor belt, so the lettuce goes into one side, blows around for a few minutes to get to the moisture off, and then lands back on the conveyor and drops out the other side into a bin. But at the moment, that doesn't exist, even though that would be very fun. So a drying rack is, albeit considerably more boring, fine. We detailed the wash pack station at Mountain Roots Farm on a video earlier this year that I will link in the show notes. The farmer there, our buddy Paul Wargo, broke down his wash pack and shows his simple drying and fan screen at the end. Again, I have no issues with that sort of, table to dry them on. If you have the space and time, build one. I'm not sure if it's essential, but I think there is no harm in going the extra mile when it comes to food safety. For industrial processors, what they are doing, based on what I can find online, is that they are mixing the greens, washing them using special tools to get bugs out, which, jealous, then running them through an industrial spinner, similar to how we do, but nicer and probably a little bit more efficient. Now, the large-scale systems I've seen do not use a drying screen, but I'm sure something like that exists. And feel free, commenters, to let me know if you've seen one, like a video or a post about industrial processor methods of drying greens involving a screen or fans of some sort. That'd be interesting. The risk of dehydrating the lettuce on a screen is pretty low, as long as you don't leave them there for too long, but it will likely increase food safety and potentially storageability of greens, so it's at least worth considering. Now, I've heard some producers say, especially in areas where they don't get heavy rains that can splash mulch and dirt onto the greens, that they try not to wash them at all. And maybe you can do this in a tunnel. I've never been able to do this really. It's just too buggy and dirty here. Like, I have earthworms and spiders in my lettuce. I could never get away with it, but I could see a path where your overhead irrigation is keeping them from getting too dusty or muddy, and then you can just harvest and pack them afterward without having to wash them. I could see that happening. Today's Patreon question comes from Patreon member Jesse. Love that I have so many supporters named Jesse on that Patreon page. Jesse asks, quote, "What packaging do I need for a beginner market garden? It will be my first summer at my local farmer's market, and I'm beginning to need supplies to package my harvest. Where do you go to shop for things like this?" End quote. All right, Jesse, great question. So I already did an episode talking about biodegradable/compostable options that I will link in the show notes. For this, I will talk more broadly about what works for certain kinds of crops, and then you can decide on the actual materials you use. And I'll also talk a little bit about where we get ours, which, to be honest, is mostly just Webstaurant. So that kind of answers that question. But for those loose greens, most growers use either bags with twist ties or tapes, for which there's like a little machine that puts the tape on the top. I don't love the tapes because the bags are hard to open when you put the tape on it and require ripping, thus eliminating any chance of the customer being able to reuse them. Anyway, loose leaf lettuces, baby greens, that sort of stuff usually goes in bags or clamshells. Clamshells take up more room in markets, in like a market setting. Like if you're taking a bunch of clamshells to market, it's kind of hard to fit that many. You can fit a lot more bags into a cooler than you can, say, clamshells. And that goes for both in the cooler and on the table and in the truck or whatever. But they do look nice, the clamshells, and are better for retail situations. For bags, it's usually like 1 gallon bags that we use. For clamshells, it depends on how many ounces you are selling per unit. Places like Webstaurant have all those details for how much fits in each container, generally speaking, but you can also head to the grocery and see what their produce packages contain to get an idea as well of how much, say, 10 ounces of spinach is and what the package looks like. In terms of greens on stems like kale and chard, most growers either band those together with rubber bands. We use size 33, I believe, or use bags. 1 gallon bags can be a little tight for large bunches if you're trying to get both the greens and the long stems in there. Those same rubber bands can work for carrots, beets, radishes, etc. Cherry tomatoes are a small ventilated 1 pint clamshell for us that hold about about a pound. Pint is a pound the world round, right? Then for bulk, we use 3-pound cherry clams that are also ventilated. We have 1 ventilated bag that we use for squash, zucchini, and cucumbers. Ventilated just meaning that they have tiny holes in them to allow for a little airflow, in case that wasn't clear. Deli containers can come in handy as well for things like microgreens, popcorn, edible flowers, all sorts of stuff. Plus, they are more reusable and recyclable than other plastic containers. Oftentimes, we'll use them to store our winter stocks from our summer veggies. Also, there are the berry containers that can range in size and material. materials, woods and fibers. We use those a lot at the farmer's market for things like cherry tomatoes and half pint berry containers, and potatoes and squash and all sorts of stuff. Potatoes can be tough to package though, as too much sunlight will obviously cause some greening, but not enough sunlight, and customers will literally not see them, meaning you have to display them somehow, but packaging them how they actually want to be packaged makes them invisible on the table. Potatoes are kind of difficult in that way. In the past, we've used little cotton bags, these little white cotton bags, and sold them in bulk that way, which was very effective, but the bags got a little too expensive to justify the cost. I think it ended up being like 50 cents or something a piece, and it's just like, I don't know, when you add that up, it's a lot. Burlap could work too, and we definitely found that people enjoyed the pre-bagged option. Just figuring out how to make it cost effective is tough. A lot of how you package your produce will depend on your marketing. At a farmer's market, for instance, there is less incentive to make the packaging look quite as nice as at like a retail store or even for chefs. Chefs really like stuff looking clean and fresh. I always say like chefs want it to look like they envision it going out on the table. Like you have to think like a chef in that way. They want their product to really awe the customers, so it helps when your product awes them. But in terms of the farmer's market, not that it can look sloppy, absolutely not. It should still look great and clean and all those things, but it just doesn't have to be quite as much of a standalone product like it does on a shelf. For instance, when we were doing farmer's markets, we did not label very much because it wasn't necessary. The label was on the table to alert the customer to what they were looking at, and it was not necessarily on every individual bag. Did the label make things look nice when we did it? For sure, but they sold without the label, so we realized that we didn't need to waste the paper and the extra labor. If they're selling without the label, you probably don't need it. You may find your market is more competitive, and then you can add those little tweaks like a sticker or like clamshells or some special packaging to make your product stand out. I've mentioned before that we use the Brother QL 800 series printer and have for many years now, and it's been great. I'll link that in the show notes. Anyway, let us know what I missed.
Now then, Rob Garrett, Wild and Plenty, Derbyshire, UK. Pulling back my tarp to check on my first early potatoes. Disaster. Ah, there they are.
Today's episode is brought to you by Good Agriculture. If you'd rather be on the farm than inside doing your taxes, you are not alone. Good Agriculture handles farm bookkeeping and tax filing, so there is no scrambling at tax time. They keep your books clean and up to date and show you where your farm's finances stand. If you're behind, they'll get you caught up. They also help farmers find funding and stay ahead of grant deadlines. You run the farm, they help the business. Learn more at goodagriculture.com/info. That's goodagriculture.com/info. All right, back to the show.
Today's question comes from Patreon member Taylor Jameson, who asks, "Hey Jesse," hi Taylor, "wondering if there are particular crops which you bunch out of the field, i.e. for ease on your body or to get the field heat off quicker, thinking particularly in the middle of the summer." Okay, so first, great questions. Here's my harvest management strategy in terms of what I harvest when. Mixed lettuce and head lettuce, along with any baby greens, are the first to come out of the field early in the morning before the heat sets in. Tender stuff just wilts and decomposes quickly, gotta get it out. Then the harvest moves over to radishes, beets, and turnips, essentially any bunching item that has a tender green on it. After that, I go to large bunching greens like chards and kale. There's an argument for switching the bunching greens and root crops, but radish greens wilt pretty easy, or at least easier than kale, so I would at least get radishes before moving on to bunching greens. Next in line will be the carrots, though I should say it's good to have something with you to provide some shade to help protect the carrots as you harvest, because although the greens aren't as tender as radishes, they are still tender and can wilt and look crappy. As the saying goes, wilted greens wilts your market table. I don't know if anyone actually says that. May not actually be a phrase, but you get the idea. A harvest cart with an umbrella or an extra bin solely to provide shade to keep the harvested bunches out of the sun while you work is important. Then I move on to green onions, which are not as tender and are among the last items I harvest besides tomatoes and peppers and squash and that sort of stuff. Sometimes in the spring, we will also do bunches of green garlic or garlic scapes, and those can be last in the harvest line. Okay, so back to your questions. In terms of ease of body, this is going to be different for every individual to some extent, but it is good to vary your body positions. I harvest a lot from my knees because that is the most comfortable for me. I know a lot of others find squatting to be comfortable as well. I will actually go back and forth, but I always just encourage you to avoid bending at the back as much as you can. Instead, bend at your knees and then bend your hips in order to save your back. It actually took me way too long to learn that. You can even try it right now as you listen to this. Simply start by bending your knees and then bend over. The pressure relief on your back is immense. The impulse when you're bending over to do something is to just bend at the waist first because it's faster, but that puts a lot of tension on your lower back. So again, start with the knees, then bend at the hips. As for what to bunch in the field, bunch everything you can. If it's getting really late and stuff is hot, you can just, turbo harvest and make your bunches in the shade or something. But something I took from Ben Hartman that I think is super helpful was to add as much value to your product as you can every time you touch it. So I like to just go ahead and get things bunched. Also, untangling things in the shed and bunching them there is very slow and time consuming. I prefer to wrap about 35 rubber bands on each wrist before I go out to harvest. We use the non-latex number 33 bands and get 70 bunches of whatever I need before refilling the bands on my wrists. That way I can keep track of the numbers. I know that I got 70 and not have my hand fall off from the pressure of having so many rubber bands on it. Also, as you slip the bands on, make sure to spread them out on your wrist. If you pile them on top of each other, they will become hard to organize and will cut off more blood flow than is probably safe. There's a technique to bunching that will save you a lot of time, but is not super easy to describe. But all you really need to know is the main point is always go around the greens and not around the carrots or beets or root or whatever it is. In other words, it's easier to get around all the greens than it is to get around all the carrots. Also, don't overwrap them. 2 times around is typically enough to hold the bunch together. And then that way, if you have to remove a damaged carrot or damaged carrot greens or whatever in the washing process, it's not too hard to get it off of the bunch because it's not tightly wrapped. Last, I always harvest a bunch of loose carrots or whatever it is that I'm trying to harvest. I put those in the bin with the bunched carrots, and that way, if I have a damaged carrot while we're washing, we can just go ahead and replace it from the loose carrots or loose radishes or whatever it is. Anyway, I think that's a good summary. Pun not intended there. After harvest, get them into a shady area or store them in the cooler and sealed bins until you can wash them. Greens will notably sop the moisture from beet and carrot roots, making them flimsy and tasteless. So harvest no more than 2 days before market if you want to keep the greens on. If it's going to be more than 2 days, remove the greens from the roots as you harvest. Radishes are less of an issue with this, but you don't want bland, flimsy carrots going to market.
All right, I hope you enjoyed it, that little compilation episode. Really appreciate your patience on the voice as always, and looking forward to a potentially better week next week. Don't forget, No Till Growers is a nonprofit 501c3, so donations are tax deductible and greatly appreciated. Please make sure to like and subscribe and or follow wherever you're getting this podcast. That's an easy way to help us out as well. Enormous thank you to all of our show sponsors. And if you'd ever like to sponsor the show, you can reach out to Farmer Michelle at notillgrowers.com. Huge shouts to Willie Breeding for the theme music, Mike Hilbert for the production help and editing, and my wife Hannah for absolutely everything in the world. Also, shouts to Epidemic Sound for the background music that you can hear. Pick up a copy of my book, The Living Soul Handbook, at notillgrowers.com to support our work. Big thank you to everyone over at patreon.com/notillgrowers, where at a certain level, or if you just bump up from one level to another, or you sign up in the month of March, you get a shout out on the show. But we are going to hold off on shout outs and our stories until I can do a full episode. So that should be robust when that happens. So stay tuned, and thank you all again so much for your patience. Much love. See you tomorrow.